You were never supposed to see any of this.
But almost 8 months on, it's still tools down on a 244-metre section.
A major transport project turns to a repair operation.
You can't turn in, you can't come out.
Deep beneath Sydney's southern suburbs lies a catastrophe frozen in time. Twin tunnels stretching 4 kilometres sit abandoned, flooded with water and littered with millions of dollars worth of rusting machinery. This was supposed to be Sydney's answer to decades of gridlock, a gleaming motorway that would save commuters 15 minutes every single day. Instead, it became Australia's most expensive underground disaster. The project is 90% complete, but entirely useless. 2 massive sinkholes tore through the earth in March 2024, swallowing buildings and exposing a web of alleged cost-cutting, ignored warnings, and engineering decisions that turned a dream into a nightmare.
Tonight, a 7 News investigation can, for the first time, show you inside Sydney's disastrous M6 tunnel collapse.
Information videos deemed top secret by the government. We got them after a freedom of information fight.
Stick around because this story is wilder than you think, and the bills keep climbing with no end in sight. The people living in Sydney's southern suburbs have been waiting since 1951 for someone to fix their traffic problem. That year, the New South Wales government drew a line on a map and called it the F6 Extension Corridor, later renamed the M6 Motorway. For 7 decades, that line remained nothing but ink and broken promises. Families bought homes, businesses opened, and traffic became unbearable while politicians kept saying the tunnel was coming soon. By the time construction actually started, some residents had been waiting their entire lives. When the government finally declared the M6 Stage 1 as critical infrastructure in December 19, it felt like vindication. The project promised to transform daily commutes for hundreds of thousands of people. Drivers would bypass 23 sets of traffic lights between Arncliffe and President Avenue. Around 2,000 heavy trucks would vanish from residential streets. Commuters would save up to 15 minutes on their journey to the city center. Time that adds up to hours every week and entire days every year. The numbers looked incredible on paper. Construction kicked off with real momentum. Instead of the massive tunnel boring machines used in other Sydney projects, engineers chose road headers. These 100-ton mechanical beasts use spinning cutter heads studded with tungsten carbide picks to grind through rock. Up to 10 machines worked around the clock, chewing through Sydney's Hawkesbury sandstone at 20 to 25 meters per week. Month after month, the tunnels took shape. Everything seemed to be going exactly according to plan. Then, March 2024 arrived and shattered everything. A 10-meter wide sinkhole exploded open in an industrial estate at Rockdale, directly above the tunnel path. The collapse was so violent it ripped the foundations from under a 2-story office building. Workers fled in panic and all tunneling operations stopped immediately. What made this particularly terrifying was the depth, or rather the shocking lack of it. The tunnel at this point was only 12 to 16 meters below the surface, barely 4 stories separating the machinery from the world above. But this disaster didn't come out of nowhere. Months before the collapse, warnings were raised and critical decisions were made that would seal this project's fate. Those decisions and what happened next would turn Sydney's grand vision into a waterlogged tomb. March 1st, 2024, started like any other construction day until the ground simply vanished. A massive crater 10 meters wide tore through the Rockdale industrial estate, swallowing everything above it. The office building nearby didn't just crack, it partially crumbled as its foundations disappeared into the void. 20 workers scrambled to evacuate the surface while 4 crew members found themselves trapped underground inside the tunnel itself. The scene looked apocalyptic, like something from a disaster movie, except this was real and it was happening in suburban Sydney. Emergency crews rushed to stabilize the area, while engineers tried to figure out what had gone catastrophically wrong. But before anyone could even process the first collapse, history repeated itself. 8 days later, on March 9th, a second sinkhole opened up just 150 meters away from the first one. 2 major ground failures in the same project area within 8 days sent shockwaves through Sydney's construction industry. This wasn't normal settlement or a minor engineering hiccup. Something fundamentally dangerous was happening beneath Rockdale. The damage inside the tunnel was devastating. Drone footage later revealed the full horror of the situation. Water poured down the walls in sheets, turning sections of the tunnel into an underground river. Concrete reinforcement hung in twisted fragments like broken bones. Expensive road headers sat half buried in mud and crushed rock. Millions of dollars worth of equipment, now essentially scrap metal. The scene looked less like a modern engineering project and more like an archaeological disaster site that had been abandoned for years. Engineers had to act fast to prevent total collapse. They pumped 1,800 cubic meters of concrete into the ground, desperately trying to stabilize the area and stop the sinkholes from expanding further. The operation was frantic and expensive, a temporary bandage on a wound that kept getting worse. Meanwhile, CGU, the contractor consortium made up of CPB contractors, Gela and UGL, made a stunning claim. They insisted their machines had encountered a high-angle reverse fault, a geological formation they said had never been documented anywhere in Sydney's massive 36,300 square kilometer basin. That claim would become the centerpiece of a legal war that would rage for over a year. But first, people needed to understand how this project got to such a dangerous point in the first place. The M6 contract had a detail that would later prove crucial. This wasn't a standard construction job where contractors simply follow blueprints handed to them. It was a design and construct agreement, which meant CGU wasn't just building the tunnel, they were responsible for designing it too. That distinction would become the foundation of a billion-dollar blame game, but it also meant every technical decision came from the same people who would later claim the problems were unforeseeable. According to multiple reports, the lead contractor allegedly chose a cheaper tunneling strategy for the difficult sections around Rockdale. WSP, a key subcontractor responsible for engineering design, had explicitly flagged this area as problematic. The ground wasn't solid Hawkesbury sandstone like much of the tunnel route. It was soft sands and clays that required specialized treatment. Standard practice in these conditions involves jet grouting, where cement-like mixtures are blasted into soft ground under high pressure to solidify it before excavation begins. The decision to allegedly skip this step saved money in the short term, but ignored fundamental geological realities. Underground Sydney is far from uniform. While much of the city sits on stable sandstone, pockets of unstable material exist throughout the basin. These variations aren't secrets. Geological surveys and decades of tunneling experience have documented them extensively. The question was never whether difficult ground existed, but whether the chosen methods were adequate to handle it. The shallow depth at Rockdale made everything exponentially more dangerous. In standard tunneling practice, engineers maintain significant cover, the amount of rock and soil between the tunnel crown and the surface. The 12 to 16 meters of cover at Rockdale was dangerously thin for a major motorway tunnel, especially in unstable ground. Every meter of depth provides additional weight and pressure that helps stabilize the excavation. Strip away that natural reinforcement, and you're essentially digging a hole through material that desperately wants to collapse. The financial picture was already deteriorating before the sinkholes appeared. The original budget of $2.52 billion had already exploded to $3.1 billion by early 2024. After the collapse, the government stopped publishing cost estimates entirely, leaving taxpayers completely in the dark about the ultimate price tag. The cheaper approach and shallow tunneling had created a loaded gun, and in March 2024, it went off with devastating consequences. By May 2025, the situation had deteriorated from an engineering crisis into a full-blown legal war. CGU dropped a bombshell announcement that sent shockwaves through the project.
A legal fight has broken out over the problem-plagued M6 tunnel. Its future now up in the air, with the contractor set to abandon the project.
They formally declared the M6 contract frustrated. A specific legal term, meaning an unforeseen event, had made fulfilling the contract impossible. They announced their intention to completely exit the project by June 30th, 2025. After pouring years into a nearly complete $3 billion tunnel, the consortium was walking away. Premier Chris Minns didn't hide his fury. In a media conference that made headlines across Australia, he delivered a line that would define the entire crisis. My best advice to the contractor today is to send the lawyers home and bring back the engineers. The statement resonated with frustrated taxpayers who couldn't understand why a 90% complete tunnel had been abandoned while legal teams argued over responsibility. It captured the absurdity of the situation perfectly. The legal battle centered on who was responsible for the design failures. Transport for NSW took a clear position. CGU designed the tunnel, CGU chose the construction methods, and CGU was responsible for fixing the problems their design allegedly failed to anticipate. The government argued that the contractor hadn't exhausted available technical solutions before declaring defeat. Ground freezing, advanced grouting, and redesigned support systems were all viable options that CGU allegedly refused to pursue because they would destroy their profit margins. The financial carnage mounted rapidly. By mid-2025, the government had spent over $5.54 million on legal fees alone. That's more than $5 million spent on lawyers arguing while the tunnel sat flooded and abandoned. Opposition transport spokesperson Natalie Ward demanded accountability from both sides. She insisted that serious questions needed answers not just from CGU, but from Transport for NSW about their oversight during the design phase. How did a design that allegedly ignored subcontractor warnings get approved? Why wasn't more rigorous geological investigation required for the shallow Rockdale section? By September 2025, construction formally halted indefinitely as CGU began demobilizing from the site. A tunnel that should have been opening for traffic was instead becoming a $3 billion political nightmare with no resolution in sight. The short answer is yes, the M6 can technically be saved, but it requires some of the most expensive and demanding solutions in modern civil engineering. Grouting involves drilling precise patterns of holes into the unstable rock and pumping specialized cement mixtures under high pressure. The grout penetrates every crack and void, essentially gluing the shattered rock back into a solid mass that can be safely excavated. For severely unstable zones, ground freezing offers an even more extreme solution. Engineers drill pipes around the tunnel path and circulate supercooled brine through them, dropping temperatures low enough to freeze all water in the surrounding soil and rock. The unstable mud becomes concrete hard ice that can support excavation. The timeline has become a cruel joke. The original 2025 opening date is long gone. Official estimates now put completion at late 2028 at the earliest, but government officials have privately admitted it could stretch well into the 2030s. That means a project that was supposed to be open by now might not serve commuters for another 6 to 8 years or longer. For Sydney's southern suburbs, the wait continues with no end in sight. The government now faces the unenviable task of finding a new contractor willing to touch this radioactive project. Any company that takes it on will inherit not just the technical nightmare, but the legal baggage and public scrutiny that comes with Australia's most notorious infrastructure failure. So, what do you think about Sydney's underground disaster? Was this an unforeseeable geological nightmare or a failure of planning and oversight? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this deep dive fascinating, smash that thumbs up button and subscribe for more investigative looks at the world's most controversial mega projects. Until next time, stay curious.